Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome. I'm Pam Bridgeforth with the Philadelphia Association of CDCs, and we welcome you to the Forward Equitable Development Conference Conversation number 3, featuring Ricardo Calderon, Tamir Harper, and Stasia Monteiro. Today, we're going to be talking about this moment as it relates to young people and how young people are really showing extraordinary levels of leadership and energy and commitment that us old heads can very much learn from and be inspired by. And today's conversation is about how we take this moment, learn from it, and support young people who are making these, stepping into these leadership roles, and what we as a sector in community development can learn from their strength and energy and insight. We want to also take this opportunity to thank our funders, our supporters, our signature series sponsors, as well as our key supporters for this event, the City of Philadelphia Division of Housing and Community Development, the John and James Knight Foundation, and of course, we could not do any of this work without our wonderful, wonderful conference planning committee members. They represent some of the most innovative and dedicated organizations and individuals in the region doing this work. And we could not begin to think about these series of conversations without their leadership and insight and just real deep thoughtfulness about this moment in time. So we thank them for this opportunity. And we thank you again for joining us. Just a quick note of housekeeping, really quickly. We are broadcasting live to Facebook, and we are recording. So if you need to step away at any moment and you miss something, we will be sending a recording of today's conversation, not only today's plenary discussion, but also of the follow-up workshops that will be happening promptly at 12 noon. And we hope that you stick around for those. They should go on from 12 noon until about 1:30. I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything. I'm not sure if I am. I'm just so excited to be talking with these young people and hearing what they have to say. I'm going to turn it over now to Stasia Monteiro. Stasia is an extraordinary individual who is doing some amazing work at HACE CDC in the Fairhill section of Philadelphia. And she's also our 2020, or one of our 2020 Rising Star awardees. And as the committee was thinking about, like, how do we, provide a space for, this opportunity to talk about young people and their leadership as it relates to our sector, Stasia was one of the first people that came to our mind as, somebody who could help guide the conversation. And then, of course, we were introduced to Ricardo Calderon and Tamir Harper, who are amazing. And we know that you all have a really delightful opportunity to hear them. And without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Stasia. So thank you, Stasia, very much.
Yeah, thank you, Pam, very much as well. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this conversation within the PACDC Equitable Development Series. As Pam mentioned, my name is Stasia Monteiro, and I'm truly honored to have been invited to moderate this conversation with two leaders who have a background of both working together and who continue to work in many forms to support young people in shaping their worlds for the better. I approach this conversation as someone who's super passionate about young people's gifts for imagining and actualizing social change. I began my work in education. I was inspired by significant mentors along the way in my learning journey, which continues, and I expect to continue for the rest of my life. And right now, I work in Eastern North Philadelphia, supporting residents in actualizing their visions for better outcomes for youth and families in their neighborhoods, in their schools, and beyond. So at this time, I'd like to invite our two panelists to share a bit about themselves. And I'll pose the following question for you all to respond to, which is, what excites you in this moment with respect to young people and opportunities for change? And so I guess I'll invite Ricardo to start us off.
Absolutely, thank you. First and foremost, good morning, everybody. Peace and blessings to everyone. During these times, I think it's super appropriate to just wish everybody health and safety, and definitely hoping that everybody's doing something for their self-care and showing self-love. These are very difficult times for a lot of different reasons. So just such an honor to be part of this conversation. And again, just wishing all the well-beings for everybody who's on this call and part of this conversation. My name is Ricardo Calderon, as mentioned. Such an honor to be here. You know, I know we're going to go through a couple of the different things that we've done and what that looks like through some of the questions. But what really excites me right now is what has always excited me about young people, which is historically, if you look at any moment in history, if you look at any movement, if you look at any major shift in culture, any major shift in thought, young people have always been at the forefront of those conversations, of those movements. So what excites me now about this generation and kind of this moment in time is the precision. So young people are very organized. Young people are, there's an energy of, we're not gonna wait anymore to be given the answers. We're just gonna go find it ourselves. And that's very exciting to me. That's very, very exciting. And I can go on and on and on, but I think it really pulls from that youthful spirit that many can consider to be naive, right? Like you're young, wait till you're older, you know, you'll learn, right? You'll learn youngin'. And while there are certain realities to that, I think part of what's great about young people is that life hasn't beat them up all the way yet. You know what I mean? Like they still get to be imaginative in terms of looking at all that is possible and not really setting limits on their thoughts, ideas, what they're passionate about, right? Like there's still that, yeah, but it's totally possible. And that's just such a beautiful energy to support, to be led by, and to be inspired by. So I think there's many reasons to be excited about not just our young generation today, but really looking back and trying to absorb some of that energy from young generations from the beginning.
Thank you, Ricardo. Tamir, would you like to share?
Yeah, good morning. It is truly a pleasure to be vibing with you all. I know this would be even more amazing in person, but we are grateful to even be able to convene via Zoom. My name is Tamir Harper, and I'm the executive director of UrbEd here in Philly. And when I think about what excites me, I'm only 20 years old, so I consider myself still a youth. I'm not ready to give that card up anytime soon, but I think it's that, one, we are sick and tired. I'm a 2000s baby. That's going to tell you how young I am. And we've lived through 9/11, the wars, like all of this stuff that continues to happen. So we're sick and tired. I think it's also a point where we will not allow the next generation to have to protest and march for the things that we are protesting and marching for now. I think we are acknowledging and respecting that we are standing on the backs of giants like the 4 men that set in Greensboro, North Carolina in the 1900s. We are respecting that and continuing their movement and continuing to understand that we have power, and that no, when it comes from an elected official, no, when it comes from someone that has power to change a system, will not be accepted, and that we are willing to stand up, yell, do whatever's necessary, even to get pepper sprayed and tear gassed, to make sure that our system actually changes and works for the generation after us, and so that we make our ancestors proud.
Thank you. That's really powerful, and I appreciate you both sharing those things out. To get into our conversation, we're talking about the intersections of youth and social change today. So I wanted to open up with a little bit about what brings us where we are now. And so thinking about the connections between our childhood experiences and our current work. Our childhood is a really impactful time in our lives, whereby we're beginning to understand and build an understanding of the nature of the world, the nature of ourselves, and that includes our capacity to shape the world in which we live. For me, like coming up, I noticed a lot of adults counseled me along a spectrum of like just kind of going along a driven path that's already there and actually driving a different path that might not be as widely supported, and encouraging me to think about challenging the status quo. And I consider myself fortunate to have learned early on that a lot of social change leaders we celebrate today faced tremendous resistance during their time. And that's something that can be left out of the retelling of their history and their experience. So I'm curious if you can share some lessons that you learned as younger folks that have informed how you operate today. And I invite you to choose who would like to jump in first.
So I guess this might be a little easier for me to think back because I just got out of my youngin days. I just think like I'm from Southwest Philly, the 19142 zip code. And as Ricardo and anyone that has heard me speak before knows that I've gotten the good, bad, and ugly of the school district of Philadelphia. I went to Tilton Middle School for 6th grade, which was rated one of the worst middle schools at the time in the city of Philadelphia. And then transferred 20 minutes to South Philadelphia to Dean and Fell for 7th, 8th grade. Then I went to the Science Leadership Academy for 9th to 12th. And I started to see those inequities. In 6th grade, I was walking into a building with metal detectors and school police officers and dark buildings and bars on windows with no air conditioning. But when I went to 7th, 8th grade, went 20 minutes outside of my zip code, I got no school police officer, no metal detectors, air conditioning in our windows, a science teacher, history books, all of those things that a student needs to learn. So I seen those inequities in the system. And then I could not sit still or sit idle and do nothing. That's why I joined the City Youth Commission and then later now launched a nonprofit. But I think it goes back to my grandma. Anywhere we are, if she sees somebody doing something wrong, she will read you the 5th degree. She does not care. Your feelings might be hurt by the time she's done with you, but it is the truth and it's out of love. So I think it comes from that and not allowing anything, not allowing an injustice to continue on. I have two handsome nephews who grow up in Southwest and West Philly, and I'm like, at the end of the day, I need them to be able to get a better education system than I've ever been able to receive, so they don't have to worry if if they decide to go to college, will they have to suffer from imposter syndrome because they don't think they're smart enough, or will they struggle when they're in statistics class because they're like, well, we only learn statistics in 12th grade. I should have been learning a little bit more math in K through 8 and then more as I got in high school. So there's multiple factors, but I think it's respecting my grandmom and making sure that I'm continuing to work, but even more so ensuring that my nephews and my 19142 family won't continue to receive an under-resourced and underserved education system.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Tamir. Thank you for sharing that. I think for me, it can go a lot of different ways. I think for me personally, just the immigrant experience really shaped kind of my perspective, just in how I view the world. So my parents were Dominican. So my parents came from the Dominican Republic in the early 70s. And when I was born, of course, I didn't have context to like what was actually going on. But in many ways, you know, the structures and programs and things that we tend to cut first in a child's life, whether it be, you know, the arts, the physical education, whether it be the spaces that provide support for our mental health, those things tend to get cut first in schools, right? And those are the very things that actually kept me alive. The sports clubs, the rec centers, the basketball leagues, I mean, you name it, right? Like the after school programs, these are things that my parents out of necessity absolutely needed to keep me engaged in because there were so many other things that they couldn't provide financially for me, right? So like these services, these opportunities were major in keeping my well-being secured from my parents, and being able to see that really instilled this idea of community for me. It just really instilled this idea of you might not ever have money, but you can always still help somebody, right? And helping someone could just be listening. You know, it doesn't have to be this whole miracle wand and we're going to change your life. Like some folks, a lot of folks just need someone to listen to them and take the time to sit with them and see them, like not look at them and take the notes in, but like really see the person. So I said to say that there was multiple points that my parents, you know, fought really hard so that as a young person, I felt loved. I felt like people cared. Even though we were struggling, even though it was a major struggle growing up, I never felt like I wasn't loved. And that's so important because for a child's developmental process, that's a need. It's a fundamental need. And there are areas that support that. And unfortunately, those are the areas that tend to get cut first. And, for me, I had the absolute blessing to be able to be involved as a young person. And I always say, I'm a product of youth engagement. Like I am a product of coaches and mentors and a great family structure. But it all comes down to the basic fundamental element that we all need, which is love. And I received that. And therefore I only know how to look at community as we have to do this together. So that's kind of shaped everything and my passions around what I've done, what I attempted to do throughout my career on the grassroots level, working in the mayor's office, as an entrepreneur, now as a leader with the Lighthouse. It's always been about how do we do this together.
Yeah, I hear that for sure. Thank you both. And yeah, as we look at folks coming together, I want to talk a little bit about like what we're seeing right now in this moment and like what it might mean for our future. So please pardon some long preamble to provide some context. So each generation is shaped by historical events and individual experiences, as you're acknowledging. And right now, our youngest generations have more immediate access to information than any generation that's come before them. And amid these overlapping crises, exacerbated racial disparities, we see in cities and communities across the country, including Minneapolis, Chicago, and Parkland, mass uprisings, movement building to challenge injustice. And whether that's in response to excessive force by police, vigilante violence, growing threats of climate change and environmental injustice, mass shootings, and other crucial issues, we see a lot of young folks, many who are quite young, 14 years old sometimes, working together to upset that status quo as they witness these traumas in their communities. In Philly, we also see young folks coming from organizations like Asian Americans United, Philly Student Union, and others who are demonstrating and rallying for a more just world. So the question is, given the background of your efforts working with young people and leading youth-based advocacy, what impacts have you observed in this growing social movement, and what opportunities do you see for long-term and lasting impact?
Absolutely. I think it's a great question. And I think there could be a billion different answers to that and possibilities to that. And certainly I'm not the expert, but I think in my limited experience, I think first and foremost, in many ways, it starts with a conversation. And the idea of, there's a saying of inviting young people to have a seat at the table. And I think that's great. I also think historically we kind of use young people as, the token young person. Let's make sure we check that off the box. Let's make sure we have a young person in the meeting. We get to say that we included the youth voice. And certainly that's one step of it, like making sure that we're I don't want to say providing access because we're not gatekeepers, but really being able to extend that invitation to make sure young people are part of it. But it can't just be for the optics of it, right? Like it can't be like we had this young person who we gave talking points to so they can look really, 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 really great. That's not hearing a young person. That's not listening to the young voice, to the youth voice. That's trying to control the narrative. That's trying to, and there's strategy to that, no doubt. I really think what is happening here is an opportunity to reimagine how we operate as society. Just in terms of how we look at hierarchies and how we the expectations we have, right? So, a lot of times, quite frankly, it's annoying to engage young people like that. And I know that's probably not the PC thing to say, but a lot of folks will stop and say, listen, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. There's a lot of mentoring that needs to be done. There's a lot of instruction that needs to be done. And while that's true, I think being able to reimagine how we view relationships in society is really important. Whereas right now, yes, it could start with a conversation, but what if we also start the conversation of how do we partner with young people, right? Like how do we actually enroll young people, any generation, any group in our society for that matter, as a partner in coming up with a solution, right? Not just a stakeholder we're going to invite when we think we need to have these meetings, or we need to put out a report, or we need to take out a survey, right? Like how are we actually partnering with the folks who are experiencing this in many ways in a very tangible on a daily basis, right? And I think that that's where the power is right now. So short term, I think shifting how we even walk into conversations with young people, I think is important. And also being courageous enough to acknowledge that we don't have the answers. We do not have all the answers. And I think what's interesting with this pandemic is that this pandemic, let's be honest, folks, we had a pandemic before a global pandemic. And this pandemic has only highlighted more the diseases we already had, the infections we already had, the sickness that we're already experiencing as a society. And everybody's shifting around for answers right now. Everybody's trying to figure it out. On a nonprofit level, for example, for the Lighthouse, we're working really hard to try to find a balance of, we know our people, we know the demographics that we serve, we know our communities, we know our kids, our youth, our families need healthy spaces to engage. They need to connect. They need to be enrolled and engaged in intentional, loving, supportive spaces. We also want to keep people safe, right? So like how we're trying to find a solution for that and how we do that, especially within the sports and recreational world, which is such a huge challenge right now. I think the opportunity that we have is inviting everybody in society to the table to be a partner in how we come up with this solution. Because I really do think this is an opportunity to reimagine just how we engage, reimagine how we see each other, reimagine how we attempt to come up with solutions. And that's not the most fun thing to say, right? Like that seems to be like a radical statement at times, where it's like, hey, let's go to the drawing board. And it's also what we kind of have to do. And I think that's where that energy comes from the young people, where it's just like, look, y'all have been trying to do things the same way for hundreds of years now. When are we going to understand that our mindset, our formula doesn't work? Our system is not designed to work the way that we want it to. So constantly trying to advocate for a system or for a structure that we have in place that was not meant or designed to be the way we want it to be is exhausting. It's exhausting. It's traumatic. It's not sustainable. So I think the short-term solution or the short-term goal that we can really achieve is taking the time to be very courageous, because it's going to take a lot of courage, to be curious enough to ask the question, what if? To ask what is possible? To ask, can we actually walk into conversations, walk into community building and community development through a different lens? And who are we pulling from in that space, right? And the last thing I want to say is, I think part of the long term, something I find very interesting of what's happening right now is that in many ways and structures in our society, it comes from the top down, right? Like the trickle effect, which I can't wrap my brain around that many times. What's so interesting is that many people were really caught off guard with this pandemic, and it was really difficult. And you're being resilience is something you really have to start practicing and sharpening a skill. We have demographics of our society that resilience has been their only option. And this pandemic has just showcased how resilient they've been and continue to do that. And I think being able to take this opportunity to actually reach out, and not to say we're serving or we're providing the answer, but really, really partnering with the community of folks with lived experiences and being informed by them, being taught by them, being led by them, because the skill that we need as a globe right now is something that our marginalized communities have been perfecting for a very, very long time. And I just think the opportunity, I don't know what the answer is. I do know that we're right now in a space where we have to reimagine how we see each other and how we actually engage with one another. And I think that starts with a conversation, but a conversation of partnership, not a conversation of we're providing answers. It's about let's discover together.
Well, give the word. I need everybody to take that one in. And if you ain't tweet this yet, it's, we had a pandemic before the global pandemic. When we just listen to what he just said, though, for that moment, like, this is nothing new. We've been already battling this stuff for God knows how long. Now it's just reaching national attention. I think towards the question, I'm going to literally just carry the torch on what Ricardo was saying. Is one, the conversation and bringing young people to the table. Shirley Chisholm said, bring your folding chair, right? I'm a firm believer, if you want young people at the table, don't tell them to bring the folding chair. Make sure they got the comfortable chair at the table, just like the other folks do. So if you want to have that conversation, actually make sure we're fully at the table. I'm gonna also say the unpopular thing. And people will probably see me tweet this probably every few months. Don't call a young person to be a consultant and not cut them a check like they're your consultant. Young people are not free labor. Young people have worth. Young people know things. Young people can get you out of a hole faster than other folks can. And I think we see it here in Philly. We see it throughout the nation, but here in Philly specifically, we oftentimes hear when the Black Lives Matter movement started hitting Philly, it was kind of, oh, we wasn't expecting it to hit Philly yet. We weren't ready for Philly yet. We weren't prepared for this protest. Every young person knew this protest was about to jump off. But if you would have engaged us beforehand, even through the process of picking a police commissioner, if you would have engaged us beforehand in the process of picking a managing director, maybe you might have known something. It takes folks to humble themselves, to be quite frank, and engage young people fully to get their opinions and consultations so that we can actually have, as Matt K. Book says, not light but fire conversations about the problems that are happening in our city and in our country. Also thinking, I'll end with this point, don't be reactive. I'm a PR major. The number of ways we learn to spin things and learn, okay, if this happens, who to call so that you can look good. Don't be reactive when engaging youth. Have them already at the table. The city has a City of Philadelphia Youth Commission. Ricardo was the executive director. I was the commissioner. The number of times that we were not engaged in conversations concerning young people, but also just through our city, was problematic. The number of times folks, city councils say, well, we have a gun violence issue, or we have a poverty issue, or we need young people to get jobs, but they don't have a city appointed youth commissioner. It's problematic. So we can't just do these things reactive. We have to really, if we're going to be committed to doing it, and if you actually want to see our city and our country change, you're going to have young people at the table as the table is being formed. Don't call us after the fact.
Can I add something to that piece? I think part of it too is that it what a great opportunity to learn from one another. You know, like when because it's not just a hey, let's I'm gonna be led by young people the rest of my life. But the reason I say partnership is because when we in life forget politics, forget social issues that we're dealing with right now, and always have, just in life as humans, when you just feel seen as a person, like as a human being, you just felt seen, that changes your engagement with whoever you're engaging with. And I think that falls for both parties. So I'll share a bit. So Tamir shared about a little bit how we met. So I met Tamir in 2015. And this young man changed my life in so many different ways. And it's because for different reasons, we were on different paths, age-wise, and obviously. However, the reason I really do love this human being is that at many points, there was an understanding that like, oh, got it, we're learning together. Like, you don't have all the, Tamir wasn't looking at me and saying, oh, this guy has all the answers. He's the greatest mentor. No. And I wasn't looking at him like, I'm going to teach you everything. Like it was like, hey, this is what I know. This is what you know. Let's learn from each other. And not to say that that's a perfect example of what it is, but I think the leading with empathy just changes the nature of the engagement. And I think there's such an opportunity to learn from both. I think because there is such a powerful space for the older generations to really mentor. And when I say mentor, not let me just pour wisdom out and like tell you the blueprint or whatever, but like engage in curiosity, engage in really learning from one another. And there's just so much power there that I think we could harness. And I think right now we're seeing evidence of that. Like we're seeing it all over the country. And I think what kind of gets me upset is that we're always surprised when young people step up to the plate. That really kind of gets to me. Like it's always a leading national story. Oh my God, look how amazing young people organizing. They've done that forever. Like what are we really talking about, right? And I think as opposed to focusing on I think instead of focusing on being surprised that young people are always going to step up to the plate and be active and be engaged, let's actually put action to that behavior. Like let's actually embrace that as part of like our human ecology and ecosystem that is like such a healthy aspect. Because I think there's an opportunity for both of us to be seen. I think a lot of young people tend to push on those generations because it is a little bit, don't sun me all the time. You know what I mean? Like, I know I'm young, but I'm not like a little completely like belligerent blank slate. Like, you know, I do have context to the world. I do have access to information now. And I think when led with empathy and met with empathy and respect just as a human who can add and be a partner in creating solutions, I think that also changes the perspective of a young person and how they view or want to engage with the older generations. And I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, no, I think you both touched on some really important things. Yeah, and especially in terms of like that exchange of learning and recognizing that like we always have more to learn, and especially continuing to learn from our younger generations is so critical, and not assuming that just because we have more age, we like automatically have more information, more knowledge, more wisdom. Like we're always in the process of learning. And so I'm curious, like, you know, thinking about the possibilities that come alive when you really connect and exchange, right? Instead of just having like a one-way sort of sharing of information. Like what, what imaginings and possibilities have opened up for you in being able to achieve that? And what possibilities might you see opening up in our city if we were to change that dynamic, transform it, so that there is more of an ongoing exchange as opposed to like sort of the status quo way that we kind of plug people in. And feel free to let me know if you need more clarity on that.
Yeah, I think, and I want to ask you to clarify a bit, is it if young people, and as Ricardo would say, was partnering with folk at the table, what could actually be changed and what possibilities are able to happen?
Yeah, and I guess let me just add the layer of thinking about community serving organizations, because that's where a lot of folks are coming from for this conversation today. So, you know, in CDCs, in civic groups, you know, there's again like this sort of chorus of wanting to bring younger voices in, but we're not always super successful in doing that. And so I'm wondering, you know, like what from your experiences have you seen open up by changing those dynamics? And what can you imagine happening in a community setting if we were to transform and have more of a horizontal leadership structure, for example, where your age is not a deciding factor in like how qualified you are to speak on a given topic? Does that make sense? Yeah,
no, that makes perfect sense. I think I will say youth engagement is not something someone can roll out of bed and just try to do. It is something that I think Rick and I are still learning. I'm still figuring out how to engage my own generation sometimes. But I do think it's pertinent that specifically when nonprofits and community development corporations and even government entities are engaging, is one, bring them at the beginning, but also like I look at some boards of organizations that are like, well, we want to increase youth engagement. And I'm like, but your board doesn't have a young person on it at all. You're not giving that young person information. But I also think sometimes it has to be a direct action. So what is I'm not going to say reward, but what is the return on investment, to be quite frank? What is the return on investment for a young person to engage in your organization? What are they getting from it? What are they learning from it? Is it mentorship? Is it a check? Is it an opportunity to learn and grow? Like, I will happily, if someone said, oh, this is an education organization to do research, you can just get a mentor from it that is respected in the field, I'm going to jump on that. So it's finding the interest of that community. It's doing a deep dive on what is the interest of that community. I think while you can't do it as much this year, is interacting with the schools. I think you can get very creative. I think educators right now are looking for creative ways to keep their students engaged. So is it you emailing the principal of your school or an assistant superintendent of the neighborhood and saying, hey, can I get into all of your schools and just present about what we do? We want young people engagement. Is it doing those focus groups to say, well, we want to do something in this part of the neighborhood? What are your thoughts? I think it's multi-factor. It's not a one size fit all on how you do this. You have to want to do a deep dive in your community. But I also will say every community has one young person that will be willing to sit down and help you strategize on a ground plan, like community organizing, get back to the ropes, knock doors, do social media push, phone bank, emails, all of those things will help, I want to say, engage and hopefully do some possibilities. And I think when we have those things, something we're doing at my nonprofit UrbEd is we're reimagining what school safety and health looks like. And we are engaging in conversations with the Board of Education, the superintendent's office, the chief of school safety, and a whole bunch of other stakeholders of when we say police-free schools and what reimagining looks like, what does that mean? What do we want to see? When we say defund the police, we don't mean get rid of all of them right now. That needs to come. Abolition needs to happen sooner or later. But we're saying stop giving all of this excessive money and start transitioning folks into having social workers and having restorative justice practices so that young people can problem solve their own situations instead of having to call authorities or resort to other deadly weapons. So I think it's multi-factor. We can, I think Ricardo and I, when we rocked out together, God knows the ideas we used to walk out with because we were just like, this is possible. Like we got 2 generations right here sitting together, just strategizing on a courageous idea to really just like, at one point, I know we were talking about how to make this all work more efficiently because government does not work efficiently. So like those type of conversations, I think engaging young people when we have a partnership, possibilities are endless.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'm gonna be short-winded here because I think Tamir is more aligned with being able to bring something to that response. I do think that transparency is huge here in that I think oftentimes generationally speaking, we pass down information. I don't think we're transparent in the process and like in our learning. And the reason I think that's important is because there's so much valuable information there in being transparent around the unknowns and being transparent around not having answers. And the reason I think that's important is because you have a generation who, it's not like they don't want to know, right? Like it's not like there isn't any type of interest. There is a deeply rooted curiosity and passion for a lot of young people. One, because maybe that's who they are, then two, like out of necessity. Like a lot of times it's out of just pure necessity. And I think we're doing a disservice by not embracing and harnessing that energy and being transparent in like, this is what this generation before you has done. Here are the mistakes. Here are the pitfalls. Here are the barriers we're hitting. This is why we can't do X, Y, Z from our perspective. Those things are important. Those conversations are important. That information is very important. Because as humans, we adapt, we evolve. That's what we do best. And I think we're doing a disservice to the younger generation by not being transparent with that information so that they can synthesize that and be able to be proactive, right? As opposed to kind of falling into the same holes and having to reinvent the wheel or re-strategize or right? Like I think there is a gap in information that we're experiencing. And in terms of reimagination, I think, you know, in terms of when it comes to engaging young people, pay young people. Pay young people, pay young people, pay young people, pay young people. It's inhumane to just tap a group of society when you need something, right? Like when it's project based and when it's just like, let's hurry up and get information because we need it for this grant or whatever the case. I know that's part of the process. I'm I hope I'm not disrespecting anybody. I think I'm thinking a bit larger in that, listen, let's pay them for what they're bringing to the table. Let's, and if it's not dollars, which should be the push, it should absolutely be putting some dollars in young folks' pockets. How are we supporting them otherwise? Like, how are we compensating them for their time, for their efforts, for their energy, for what we pay people to do full-time who have master's degree and PhDs, right? So I think that's very important. I also think that, you know, the city of Philadelphia, we're a city of silos. You know, like we unfortunately are a very segregated city. And in terms of how we operate, we operate in a very individualistic kind of approach. And, you know, these times, if you're not partnering, then we're not going to make it through, right? Like, we're just not going to make it through. And I think being able to reimagine how we even look at school, I think being able to reimagine how we look at education as a whole, like these aren't new things, right? Like, the young people in this city in particular have been advocating for all of these themes, topics, issues for since the beginning. Now there's a spotlight on it, right? There's a heightened sense of urgency around it because of what's going on. But again, what a great opportunity to reimagine. So, for example, looking at schools, you know, for so long, so many groups have been advocating. So many groups have been showing up to the school district buildings. So many groups have been showing up to meetings and posters and signs and emails and petitions and projects and I mean, you name it. The folks on this call, right? Like, there's so much organizing going on for these issues. A lot we're hit with kind of like, well, not viable, not really realistic, not whatever. COVID hit, y'all, and we came up with solutions real quick, right? Entities, and we have entire industries that said working remotely is impossible. In 2 weeks, they figured it out. They figured it out. And just what a great opportunity to reimagine what that looks like, right? So, like, in our schools, you know, we know how much young people are suffering right now. Like, we have great people on this call. We can come up with the statistics. I'm very interested to see what's going to happen as a result of the information we find out when it comes to the mental health and our psyche and everything that's going on. Let's reimagine how we're engaging kids in school. Why don't we have a class where CDCs come in and host a class in school? Like, why is that not a course that young people are taking to be aware of the fact, oh my God, this is part of my community. I can actually, in the 4th grade, be a part of helping my community, right? Math, science, it's all important. That's great. Yes, it's necessary. Day to day, we need to know what's going on as humans. And I think that's really important in terms of how we reimagine how we're working together, and not just trying to operate and tackle these issues that are very complicated individually, because we're not going to get there like that.
Yeah, that makes all the sense, and definitely tugs at some themes that I've heard both from young folks and from other folks that I'm working with now, in terms of that isolation and also that, like, those missed opportunities for connection. And then, Tamir, you had mentioned a little bit about your work with UrbEd, and I'd like to invite you to share more about that. So can you share a little bit about how the organization, like, where you got that initial idea, how you brought it together in formation, and, you know, how that work has looked for you in terms of navigating conversations with people who are leading organizations, oftentimes much older than yourself, and what you might say to young folks who might be interested in following a similar path.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I co-founded UrbEd my junior year of high school, so 2016, 2017 time, with the idea of disrupting public education. I launched it with a good friend named Luke Risher, because I felt as though oftentimes that young people couldn't be unapologetically them and had to get things cleared and had to get talking points okayed before they were able to say and do what they wanted to do. And I was sick of it, but I also felt like there was no for youth, by youth focused nonprofit around education in the city of Philadelphia. So we co-founded UrbEd with, we currently have 4 campaigns, and it's reimagining school safety and health, which talks about removing school police officers from schools, doing restorative justice training, making a timeline to actually ensure that the safety and well-being of students are met throughout the next 5 to 10 years. as well as re-envisioning school boards. When we talk about young people having a seat at the table, we have 2 student reps specifically here in Philadelphia on the Philadelphia School Board that does not have voting powers. So we are working, our campaign is actually gearing up as we speak to actually call on the Commonwealth to change the Constitution and for City Council to make a proposal to change the Home Rule Charter to ensure that young people that are serving on a school board aren't just there sitting there and giving opinions, that their vote is actually counted. We also look at teacher diversity. 2% of our nation's public school teachers are Black males, when a lot more of our students are Black and brown. We need to change that statistic. So we are continuing to figure out ways to make a creative pipeline. So we're starting in middle school, recruiting students to be teachers, not in high school, not in college. And we're working, as I like to say, to make education look sexy again, because back in the day for Black folk, education, when you told your family you was an educator, they was excited. We are trying to bring that excitement back. And I think that's something that I'm sure everyone has been following and engaging in conversation is redesigning our school buildings, removing asbestos and lead paint from our schools. We say we don't want 21st century places of learning. We want 22nd century places of learning. Because if we look at the mission of education, it is to prepare students for the next generation of jobs and to be active citizens. So when we're looking at the 21st century, we're making everybody behind if we're not starting to think of the 22nd century. So we literally work tirelessly to do that and empower young people. We just brought 4 high school students onto our team. Stipend is the first time in UrbEd's history to actually stipend young people for the work that they are doing, because again, pay young people for their work. We are fighting to get more funding as we speak to hopefully increase stipends for those folks. But I think to the latter part of your question of what experience, like what are those experiences sometimes sitting at the table? Sometimes they're uncomfortable. Definitely when I first launched and I was in meetings and folks would be like, well, what is UrbEd? Why did you launch it? You guys don't have any money. Or when we apply for grant applications, they're like, well, you've only been here for 4 years and you guys don't have enough money, or you don't have X, Y, and Z. And we're like, well, you can't get that far if you don't invest in it now. Because I don't have any plans to make UrbEd go anywhere. We're already starting to think of who's the next young person to be the executive director, because that we need folks at the table that's been close to the education system. I'm going to be almost 3 years removed from Philly schools. So ensuring that we have young people at the decision table. And to the last part of, for young folks that's thinking about doing it, Ricardo, I say it all the time to Ricardo and other folks, is you don't have to launch a nonprofit. Sometimes you can launch an initiative, launch a project. Launching nonprofits, if you don't have the proper support system, can actually remove you from the work of on the ground advocacy and coalition building and being a disruptor, and can put you sitting at a computer and a desk of making sure you're applying to grant applications, making sure you're on board, and making sure you're following state and federal laws and all of those things. So just plan, sit there and think, because I think if you do launch a nonprofit, it will be successful. Because if you're even thinking about it, that means you want one and that you're willing to go through it all to get it. But just surround yourself with folk who will guide you and mentor you, but also just be a sounding board. I call many people when I'm like, well, if we go this direction, is that okay? Or what do you think about this? So make sure you have the sounding board, but most importantly, believe in yourself and don't burn out. Young people do burn out. Take breaks, unplug, enjoy life. As I'm entering my junior year, I'm starting to already think about my senior year, and I'm like, well, how can I make sure I'm living my best life before I have to make sure I'm paying bills and a mortgage and all of those things? So enjoy, and also just pace yourself, honestly, just pace yourself.
Thanks so much, Tamir. Yeah, and Ricardo, I had a question written for you that you've already touched on a lot of this. We've already gotten a lot of insights about like how your work looks, but I'd like to invite you to share any additional thoughts on, you know, your role with the city previously, your role with the Lighthouse now, and how you've used those spaces to hold space for young people to step into leadership roles, and what advice beyond what you've shared you might, or even reaffirming what you've already shared, you might counsel to a CDC, a civic, or even a block captain association as they're trying to bring younger people into leadership roles. And like, thinking about the existing structures and like whether or not those should change. So any thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think, listen, there are folks way more qualified to give a surgical answer to what you're asking. And this is going to seem super basic and very simple. Young people, more than anything, when I was young, more than anything, I wanted a space where I felt seen and heard. And I think part of the challenge when asking young people to be engaged, quite frankly, is a lot of times we're not ready to actually receive and embrace them. And being able to provide space where we allow young people to feel comfortable, like, hey, this is a safe space where you're going to be engaged. It's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to not know. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to share your thoughts and ideas. It's okay to fully express yourself. That takes a lot of work to do that. Like that's work that is ongoing. That's not like a workshop. That's not a training. That's not a retreat. That's not a you signed an HR document that says you're going to take trainings around implicit bias and things like that. This is relationship. This is walking in relationship with someone. And that takes a lot of work. And I think oftentimes we're so, let's be real, y'all, there's so much trauma that we're facing on a day-to-day basis that it's hard to not just think of, oh my goodness, we need to come up with a solution. Like we need to get the work done. We need to, the strategic plan, the working plan, the budget, the grants, and yes, all of that is necessary. If we're not starting with our human being first, none of that stuff is going to happen. I think there's some really cool tools, and I'm sure many of the folks here on the call are aware of Social Transformation Project. And something that I think is so beautiful is the wheel of change and their idea of like how transformation actually happens. And you start with hearts and minds. Like you start with like the crucial elements of what a human experience is, which moves you into the structure and behavior of society and what we're going on. But the starting point is hearts and minds. And I think it's difficult, but I think being able to engage young people properly, and for it to be sustainable and for it to be healthy for both parties, is starting there. It's starting with our vulnerabilities. It's starting with, our truth in a lot of different ways. And that personally, I have seen to build healthy relationships. The work and all that, is important, and that comes. I think just the importance of building healthy, empathetic relationships is so crucial. And a lot of the times, it's just being heard. A lot of the times, it's just being heard. I'm gonna take a moment of privilege if I can, because I just have such a beautiful relationship with this young man, and I do want to say, Tamir, dude, it really is an honor, brother. Like it's really great to years later, man, be on a panel discussion together, and just the things that you've done in such a short period of time, man, is why I'm so inspired by you as a human being. And what I think is great about that is Tamir and I over the years have had many different conversations, and what was so interesting is it was less about like plugging away at the strategic plan. It was more like, and I'll speak with Tamir, like Tamir gave space for me to be heard. Like he took time to listen to me as an adult, as someone who was supposed to be the mentor. Like he let me be heard. And I hope to think that I did the same for him. And I think that provides grounds for a healthy, trusting relationship. Now let's get to what let's get to. Let's get to what we got to go to. And, I think for entities, just being able to create those safe spaces, and that looks like compensating young people, right? So making sure that they feel good and confident, they're paid for what they do. But also, how are we caring for them? How are we being intentional around their mental health? Like young people are getting hit really hard right now with what's going on. And, I'm a new father, just had a baby girl, and I'm looking at children and I'm thinking, my goodness, like these are such formative years for you in terms of how you connect to social interactions, how you connect to other people, how boundaries, self boundaries, right? Like there's so many things that young people are not being able to connect and engage with right now. And that's going to have lasting implications and impacts on their psyche, right? And their overall perspective on life. And I think, again, just being able to honor when you're trying to engage a 17-year-old, that's 17 years of life already. And we're talking about Philadelphia, we're really talking about a 45-year-old, right? Like this, you've experienced life already. It's hard to say, hey, 17-year-old, let's get you into this really cool thing that we want to do without honoring your 17 years of like your life already, right? And I just think that's super, super, super important to be able to honor the whole person. And, you know, while we're building up the leadership, being comfortable and vulnerable enough to know when to follow, and when it's necessary to put the work down and work on the real work, which is our relationships and what we're learning from that ultimately applies to, you know, the work that needs to be done. So I think it's a long-winded way of saying we got to start with the human. We got to start with hearts and minds. And with young people, that might look like, hey, let's not come to you after we have a plan. Why don't we come to you when we're stuck, when we don't have the answer, and let's figure it out together. I think a lot of times the outline is put together, and that makes sense. There's let's keep young people safe. Let's be strategic, right? There's a responsibility we have to not just invite young people into like chaos. I think there's power in young people seeing the chaos, though, you know, and being able to learn from that. So I'm gonna stop now because I'm gonna keep getting long-winded and just super passionate about loving people. But I really do think that's skipped. I really do think it's skipped. And loving young people looks different than loving, you know, a 45-year-old or a 2-year-old. Like when it comes to teenage, there's a very specific type of love that we have to be intentional with giving, you know, to be able to have sustainable partnership and relationship. So.
Yeah, my fault. I know we have to jump to Q&A, but much love, respect, Rick. You literally, you came in to my life during a time of like, I was learning what advocacy was, and it was okay to make mistakes and like to say, I don't know. And you would be like, well, I don't know either. So we got to figure it out together. And I think it shows the partnership, but also the respect. Even at like 14, 15, Rick was like, yeah, we'll figure it out. But also just even more so, just trusting and believing. From Ricardo sitting down with me after school and trying to teach me Spanish when I was just like, yo, I don't know Spanish and I just need to get this class done so I can get an A and call it a day. But to me, even like now, like still caring about Spanish of like, because one, his care to teach me and be like, yo, you can actually learn this. Like I will take time when I have 1,000 emails in my box and every city entity is calling me to do something. I'm going to still sit with you, Tamir, after a long day and try to teach you Spanish. From when we're in Nashville and Tamir has a concussion and Tamir doesn't like to follow doctor's orders and cry the entire plane ride home because his head is like killing him. Rick is with me like, yo, bro, it's cool. You like, you're fine. You're safe. You're okay. And for me to be able to acknowledge like, yeah, I'm actually safe. Like I know Rick will make sure nothing happens to me. But also in this meeting, if I say something wrong, Rick is not going to be like, yo, Tamir, you said this wrong in front of the entire city administration. He's going to shoot me a text, be like, yo, you this is the wrong data. Just try to correct yourself real quick or tell me after the fact. So it's that relationship and partnership and mutual love for each other to guide and respect and just push each other to be the best people we can be.
If I do want to be responsible for the exact question. I also think engaging young people earlier is really important, right? So like it's to engage a 17-year-old is something. And for example, like Block Captain Association, like there's some great work. Our block captains are our heroes in these neighborhoods, right? For a lot of different spaces. And I think being able to engage young people earlier so that they can see like this is a part of community, this is a part of process. Like this is a part of what I'm learning as part of like a healthy community and what that looks like. So that it's part of their learning process. It's part of what they see and perceive in the world, as opposed to like, let's engage a 17-year-old who like, we've already kind of shown some not so much love, you know what I mean? And there's a lot of work to unpack that needs to be done with that. So I think early engagement is critical, so that 17-year-old grows up to see from experience firsthand the importance of being engaged in these spaces is important as well.
Yeah, thank you both. If you think about tying every single piece of this together, like, wow, that's like robust and powerful beyond measure. Like to think, I think, like you said, Ricardo, like having that human first, like, seeing and hearing the person in front of you, like so often that gets overlooked. So often that is secondary to whatever else is going on. And I just truly, feel that until we do that, it's hard for the person in front of us to really see all possibilities if they can't even see themselves as being like a welcome possibility. So I appreciate you bringing that to the forefront and reiterating that for sure. So yeah, we do have Q&A. There's a couple of questions coming in, but not as many, so feel free to add more if you'd like. Before we jump into what's there, I just want to return to some questions that were posed to people when we registered for this talk today. And those questions were, what would you say to your 19-year-old self now? And what would you say to any young person today as a form of encouragement or challenge? And so there are a few responses here that I'll share out, and then I'd love to hear from you too in terms of either what these bring up for you or how you might respond to the questions. So some things that came through were, one, your young self is more capable and visionary than anyone will give you credit for. Another, use many streams of information to stay informed, stay engaged, and build relationships. Think more about thinking outside of the system is another. Stay spiritually grounded, gain more knowledge in culture and civics, and be careful where and with whom you spend your energy. Another is always try to see how the individual project you're working on contributes to the larger picture. Don't get tunnel vision. Another, fight harder and understand the history of how we ended up where we are today and provide opportunities to learn. And then another, find yourself in something that you love, take chances, break the mold. The journey only makes sense looking back, choose challenges over careers. And there's more here too. I guess I'll share this one because it resonates with me a lot. And what it is what makes you different is your superpower. Find people who believe in the power of your difference. And I feel privileged to have had people in my life who saw my differences as assets instead of, detriments, while I also experienced that at the same time. So yeah, I guess I would first welcome you to either respond to those questions, I'll reread them, or respond to what some folks shared out. So those questions again are, what would you say to your 19-year-old self now? And what would you say to any young person today as a form of encouragement or challenge? And Tamir, of course, acknowledging that you are still very much a young person, and we honor that and see the power in that. So recognizing that you would be talking essentially to yourself and your peers in responding to this question. So I welcome you to share what comes up for you here.
So one, I think the answers that were provided were just powerful. And honestly, I wish someone was telling me that, not just at 19 though, sometimes like at 16, 17, like Rick was saying, 17-year-olds that are in Philly are really like 43-year-olds. So we kind of need that a little bit before we're 17. I think what I'll tell my 19-year-old self is to just enjoy life a lot more. Like I most recently got into traveling, and it's not as work focused, but I think like you just have to enjoy life and treat yourself if you're working this hard. Like treat yourself, respect yourself, and do what you want. And I think to any young person, I'm a firm believer no is a complete sentence. It needs no justification. I think oftentimes when a young person say no, an adult is always like, why? Or gives a blank stare like we owe them a response to anything else. My no is no. It's a complete sentence. It's a statement. Most times it's in all capitalization. And you don't have to say anything else than no. So just like respect yourself on that note and just like say no when you don't feel comfortable. Say no when you're like, I don't want to do this today. I want to relax. Now, don't say no when you're at work and your boss is telling you to do an assignment, but like say no to the things that you have an opportunity to say no if you don't want to do
Uh, there was that question trips me all the time every time it's asked. It's an interesting one. I think honestly, if I were to speak to my 19-year-old self, I would really encourage me at the time, brother, don't hide the fact that you need help. Don't tiptoe around asking for help. Go get it. I think for me at 19, and I'm sure many, teenagers dealing with identity, issues and kind of being young, but stepping into this young adult world and college and starting careers and picking majors. And it's like, it could become very overwhelming. And I think for me personally, outside of just education, it was, a time where I was like, I had an idea of things that I wasn't comfortable with, whether it was my own mental health, my own fears, my mindset, whatever the case may be. But there was a fear to ask for help in a courageous way. There was a fear to openly sit down and be like, you know what? I should probably talk to someone. I should really seek out a therapist to like help me organize my thoughts and my feelings and what I'm going through. So I would encourage and invite my 19-year-old self to have the courage to stand firm in not being okay. And also understand that everybody else is also not okay. You know what I mean? Like this human thing, this thing called life is such a bizarre experience. And more oftentimes than not, your peers, people older than you, people younger than you, they're scared too, Rick. And that's part of life. It's okay. Like we're not supposed to have all the answers. And I would have tried to have that conversation. I would try to have that conversation around trying to embrace the fact that it's okay to be scared.
Yeah, really appreciate that for sure. Yeah, and it speaks back to what you were talking about with transparency too, as we think about like organizationally and just like collectively how we navigate challenges and just being clear with each other about those things. So yeah, definitely appreciate that. Thank you. I do see a question in here about, I'll just read it as it is, and we can try to extrapolate the question there, but it says, 2 of the main failures we have made with younger people is with how we address gun violence / murder and the pandemic. The uptick with shootings and younger people contracting the virus is clear evidence. How do you think we can improve educating and engaging younger people to effectively address these issues? So there's the question.
Be 100% honest, I literally started reading email. I am so sorry. That is poor form. It had like exclamation points and all that. Could you restate the question? I'm so sorry.
No problem. So 2 of the main failures we've made with younger people is how we address gun violence / murder and the pandemic. The uptick with shootings and younger people contracting COVID-19 is clear evidence. How do you think we can improve educating and engaging younger people to effectively address these issues?
It's not on a piece of paper. I can tell you that. It's definitely not going to happen by putting a piece of paper together. That's such a complex issue, right? And I really, really, really do think that it starts early. Like it really, really does start early. In so many ways, we're failing our young people in trying to raise a generation that actually has a shot. And that the young people picking up the gun, that's not their first option. That's not their dream and goal. You know what I mean? Like there are reasons that's happening. And this is not going to sound like a popular statement, and I'm okay with that. Early on when we had a lot going on in the city, and businesses being broken into and things of nature, there was so many emotions, and I felt so conflicted as a community member, as a new father, as a husband, as a community person. I felt so conflicted because on one hand, it's like, come on, y'all, let's not do that. On the other hand, I'm seeing a mother whose kids have been starving before a pandemic. She just lost her job and legitimately has no way to feed her kid. How do I feel about her going get some bread? Like, how do I feel about her in her world? Her own decision might be, I don't agree with what I'm about to do. I cannot watch my daughter or my kid starve tonight. And I said to say that there's a reason these things are happening. There's a reason there's a specific age demographic when we're looking at gun violence that everybody in the city is breaking their brains of trying, how do we support this demographic? How do we get them? How do we engage them? How do we prevent this? Well, we got to start way earlier. We have to start way earlier. If we're not providing an actual education system that actually educates and actually inspires our children, what are we ultimately trying to achieve? If our schools look like prisons, how do we think we're going to operate in that? Right? Like that, these are real things that they're not new. They're not things we didn't know about before. They aren't things that the many youth groups in our city and movements and advocacy groups haven't been talking about for decades and centuries. These aren't new. These are not new things. And I think in terms of how we approach it, there needs to, and this is utopian stuff. This isn't like, there's such a lack of love. There's such a lack of love. And when you're not loved, things are going to happen, you know? And I think when we look at our community, when we look at our infrastructure, when we look at just our ecosystem, we have to acknowledge that it's wildly unhealthy. We have to acknowledge that, like, we're past the point of saying like there's racial inequities. That's known. These buzzwords are great. They look awesome on press releases. They look great in strategic plans. They bring in funding and grants. We have to stop acting like these are new ideas and new things that are happening. Until we decide that we're going to actually change it, these will continue to be the problems that we have. And I really do think it's really about early intervention. Like, we really have to start when these young kids are children. And that's where it starts. In terms of being able to engage this demographic right now, we have to understand that they're hurting. We have to understand that people are hurting physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. They are hurting. And we are animals. When you put our backs up against the wall, we're going to resort to our animalistic behavior. And a lot of us are being forced in our society to behave in ways that are detrimental to our own health and that of our community. And I think we need to really understand the collective public health. Like, we've been experiencing crises since the beginning of time. So I think we just really need to shift our perspective and lens and how we're looking at what we're trying to ultimately solve. And I also think looking at it as a problem is part of the problem, because we're going to be operating from a deficit perspective. Like, what that mindset is going to come from, like, solve this problem, solve this problem, solve this problem. The solutions are in front of us. In many ways, we have to stop focusing on the problem and focus on what has actually worked. Let's look at structures that empower young people and actually create space for them to feel confident, secure, competent, prepared to take on life, and not just the job. Like, I think we have to shift that as well. Like, I think it's great that our education system is like preparing folks for careers and jobs and being productive citizens. That's fantastic. Education needs to start about the person. Like, we're building a professional in second grade. Why? That second grade student needs to understand how to be a kid, a healthy child, to be able to develop those skills that they will eventually transfer into a workforce, or to be able to be productive in whatever aspect that they choose. But I think it has to start early. It has to start early, because by the time someone's 16, 17, 18, and picking up a gun, it's because we already failed them. It's because we already failed them. And the solution's not going to come in trying to change their mindset at 17. You know what I mean? We have to love them. We have to showcase them. We need to embrace that child when they're born. We need to embrace that young person and let them know that there is love out there and there are options out there. And we need to make those options accessible, and really think through how we're doing that. So again, it goes back to what I've been saying, and I know it's not redundant, but this is just an opportunity for us to reimagine how we live, how we human. This is an opportunity to reimagine how we human. And I think there lies the answers that we're seeking. there lies the answers that already exist, the solutions that already exist. They just don't often get enough attention. So as much attention we're pushing to that, because I think also the narrative is important. Like, yes, these are real issues, but we don't showcase enough the young people who then have fundraisers to pay for the funeral of the young person who got shot. We don't talk about that as much, right? We don't talk about that the same young people who might have been involved in that incident are the same people who actually are taking care of the families, right? So like I think we need to shift the narrative of how we're actually viewing the problem and embrace what's actually working, because Philadelphia has so many great entities doing phenomenal work. And a lot of folks with very little resources, and they're making things happen because it's not rocket science, y'all. How do we love people? How do we sprinkle humanity in what it is that we're trying to do? And that really, I think, is the key. So early intervention, without question.
Yeah, thank you, Ricardo. And I know we're a few minutes over, and I'm wondering if there might be 30 seconds for Tamir to close us out before we transition.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, no, I think Ricardo is hitting the nail on the head. I think we got to start looking at folks in kindergarten. What are the wraparound services? I'm also an education major. Every student needs to have an IEP. Don't give certain students IEP. That individual learning plan, that individual development plan, that individual loving plan that will get that student all the way through their education system. How are we ensuring that young people have social workers and counselors in first and second grade? Because everybody got a reason to sit on a couch. Something happened to you in your life that you can use a couch to sit on. So using all of our services starting early. Don't start saying, well, we want to get young people jobs and we want to start them going to college once they are ready, 17, 18. We got to do that beforehand. We got too many institutions in the city of Philadelphia not to ensure that every young person, if they want to go to college, can enter a college debt-free, that can go into CTE, that can get a job. We got too many options. Now it's actually just facilitating those options and actually starting, not when they're 17, 18, but starting, okay, in kindergarten, we have this many kindergarten. This is how many jobs we're going to need. This is how many college placements we're going to need. This is how many counselors and social workers we're going to need. All of these things need to be thought about and not being reactive.
Thank you. And yeah, I just want to say thank you for sharing this this conversation and all of this richness with me and with everyone else here today. I hope this is the conversation we can continue into the future.
Definitely. I knew you guys would be amazing, and you put your thing down. As somebody said to me before, y'all dropped the mic. And yeah, I was deeply inspired and energized, and I was taking furious notes. Everything you said, I connected with, and I know our participants connected with. I can tell that they connected with it because everybody who signed on was still on up until just a minute or two ago. That's how engaged this conversation was. So thank you for that. Thank you so much for who you are as individuals and what you bring to your work and what you bring to the city of Philadelphia. There are many, many problems in our city, but clearly, we are engaging right now with people who are a part of the solutions. And I'm very humbled. And I know our board of directors is very excited and grateful for your participation. I want to just give some folks some quick directions as to what we'll be doing now. Firstly, again, thank you, Ricardo. Thank you, Tamir. Thank you, Stasia. Amazing, amazing job. Today's program definitely was recorded, and we'll be sending that out and making that available shortly. We want to let you know that right at 12 noon, we're going to go right into our workshops, and you'll be able to access those workshops in the chat box. There should be links in the chat box to those workshops, so you can choose which one you want. And those workshops will start approximately at 12 noon, but end around 1:30. I was remiss, and I did not mention the fact that one of our major funders for today, I forgot to mention, and I don't know why I forgot, but it's the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, which their support for the entire series is making it possible that we can have Tamir and Ricardo with us today, and Stasia. So thank you, the folks at PCA. We appreciate that. And there on your screen, you'll be able to see the name of each of the two workshops, as well as the workshop leaders. They're two really very strong workshops. And again, although all those folks have done some amazing things, and I know the people who are interested in participating in those workshops will learn a lot from their endeavors. Thank you again, everyone who joined us today. We look forward to continuing our conversation on September 2nd. Our headliners will be Edgar Villanueva, Dr. Laura Otten, and Casey Cook from the Community Bread and Roses Fund, Community Fund. So we hope to see you then on September 2nd. We'll be getting out information to you shortly. And thank you again for joining us today. And check your chat box for the links and also your original reminder for today's conversation, because I believe there are links for those workshops also in that reminder. Thank you guys very much. Everyone be safe, stay safe, and continue to do your amazing, amazing work. Thank you.